John Everson from Ameriprise Financial and the Mirius Group of Financial Advisors. Good morning, John. Thank you for filling in for Phil today.
Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for having me. Happy President's Day. I always enjoy the opportunity to fill in for Mr. McCoy.
Well, you are just absolutely stellar in your sub appearances. Phil should worry about that whole Wally Pip Lou Gehrig thing, John. So just throwing that out there.
Every once in a while, they dust me off and from the bench and send me into the action. So it's always good to feel valued and wanted. How's that?
Yeah, and John, I would actually think that Phil would be subbing for you, even though he subs for you many other days, but he's actually subbing for you.
Does make more sense that way.
Well, Mr. Stubbsville, that's a great point. You know what is interesting is that, in fact, here in about another 5-6 weeks, I actually start my 40th year with this firm in this industry. And so what's interesting is because of the challenges with regard to how our business has evolved and changed itself, sort of evolved over the course of several decades, and the many things that we're trying to do at the Mirius Group, I spend an awful lot of my time business building as opposed to individual, eyeball to eyeball with client kind of work. So Phil McCoy does a great job with that. Tyler Butler, the other advisor here in our office, who is up and coming and doing a great job. Those guys have stepped in a big way to help keep us moving forward. And because of that, our industry is actually fairly safe because I have great people who do understand what's going on behind the scenes and, don't have it's not a deadly profession, I'll put it that way.
Well, that's a nasty paper cut can get you now and then, I guess.
Paper cuts are nasty, but I got to acknowledge something. I enjoyed that first segment as well, but I got to make sure that Mr. Fisher's, those employment offers of, what was it? You get 7 days off for every 4 weeks that you work?
Yes.
I got to make sure that my crew doesn't hear any of that because, if every month if they're demanding, hey, I'm off next week, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Where'd this come from? So,
yeah.
But no, our crew does a great job, and they are exceptionally competent at the work that they do.
John, I want to ask you a couple questions in regards to change of life events that take place. So not to get political here, just talking about the facts. We've got several federal employees in our area who are finding themselves out of work and have some choices to make. So let's talk about those who are older and beyond the age of 59 and a half, when you can start to access some of the things that you've put aside, IRAs, 401ks.
Yeah.
If you're a Fed, it's a TSP program, whatever that situation is. Take us through what a financial planner does to help set you up for that moment. And then when the moment hits, what do you do next?
Yeah, that's a really good place to start. And, and you're right, Rob, there has been, here within the last few weeks, an awful lot of focus. Obviously, the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, tremendous number of local residents who are federal government employees, and whether they commute into the city or they work at one of the local facilities, whether it's the VA hospital, the IRS, ATF, the Coast Guard, whatever, lots of folks have been impacted and affected by that change. Now, while it's not just federal employees, obviously, there's a lot of industry and a lot of folks, a lot of transition that does go on. And what is interesting is one of the biggest things that we spend an awful lot of our time talking about, especially first meetings with anybody, we spend time talking about what we refer to as foundational knowledge as to how money works. So we actually go through and explain that there are basically three types from a tax point of view, three types of money that people typically have available at their disposal. Traditional non-qualified money, most of us think of that as regular money, okay? And it's dollars that are left over after we get a paycheck and so forth. And you can, it's the money that piles up in your checking account or your savings account, and you can take that and send your kids to college, or you can, years ago I paid for a daughter's wedding. There's all kinds of things you can do with that money. You can invest it. You can go buy real estate, go buy a house, lots of different kinds of things you can do. Those dollars are on what we like to refer to as a pay-as-you-go arrangement. with the IRS. And what I mean by that is as you earn interest, dividends, whether it's some kind of a capital gain, something like that, as those events occur, you get the opportunity to share some of your profits with the taxing authorities. So in our case, locally, state and federal both get a little bit of that action. We also spend time talking about traditional tax-qualified funds. And these are the traditional retirement accounts, so the 401ks, the TSP type accounts, traditional IRAs, SEPs, simples. There's about 15 to 20 different kinds of things inside of that traditional tax-qualified segment of possible places to invest money. And we try to make sure that people understand what the actual impact of required minimum distributions are going to look like. Because in my assessment now, 39 completed years of doing this, one of the biggest things that people often fail to consider or to think about is what is the impact of those required distributions. And oftentimes they're going to be forced to take taxable sums of money out of those accounts that far exceed what their lifestyle requirements actually are. So then the challenge becomes, well, okay, so you take that money out, and again, just a reminder that once those required minimum distributions start, those happen on an annual basis until one of two things occurs. Either you've drained those accounts of all of those deferred taxable dollars, or you pass away. And even if you pass away, you still have not avoided taxation because those assets are what we refer to as IRD assets, income in respect of a decedent. And the point being that there's still income tax liability that is due on those dollars, but you didn't finish squaring up with the taxing authorities. Therefore, your heirs will get that opportunity to finish paying your tax liabilities. So we try to make sure that people understand what the implications of those dollars are, because that's one of the biggest myths. And this is 39 years of experience that's about with this next statement I'm going to make. One of the biggest myths in America is you'll be in a lower tax bracket when you retire than you were when you were working. Most of our clients, people who are good stewards over the financial resources they have at their disposal, who are conscientious about not living beyond their means, most of those people retire to the same bracket that they were in when they were working. And we experience a lot of people who suffer from what I refer to as bracket creep, where as those distributions get larger in retirement off of those tax-qualified accounts, their taxable income continues to rise, and oftentimes they actually wind up in higher tax brackets than they were even when they were working. So we spend time talking about that, and then we also make sure that people understand Roth IRAs, whether they're contributory accounts, conversion accounts, how those work, and the fact that there's a lot of people have this perception, Rob, that when they get to retirement, that okay, I've arrived and I can kind of kick back and enjoy this. And frankly, what most of our clients find is that's the time when they actually need be the most proactive at managing what they're doing, because it switches from accumulating, as much as you can to, okay, you've done a good job of that. Now, how are you going to manage this, in particular from an income tax point of view?
Bill was trying to kick back, and I made him come in and co-host 3 days a week. So his kicking back days were over at that point.
And talking about a tough taskmaster, he expects me here at appropriate time, long before I'd like to get out of bed in the morning, and expects me to ask questions that people can understand.
I expect one right now from you.
Yeah, but my Tennessee accent, that works to my advantage. Hey, John, building up on the point that Rob was making earlier, there's always some investment anxiety. With the recent employment status of a lot of people, have you seen that anxiety to increase at all, or is it pretty much what it has been over the last several years? What
our personal experience here locally has been, now we've talked to, in the last couple of weeks alone, we've actually spoken to a lot of federal employees, okay? So partly because we have a lot of existing clients who work for the federal government. We've touched base with all of those folks, even though, they may not be, in their normal appointment cycle. We've actually reached out to them to say, hey, where are you with regard to the fork in the road decision? Perhaps it's been presented to you. Let's maybe talk that through. We've actually had a number of folks who have said, I'm actually going to take that. We had one individual who was planning to retire at the end of August anyway. Now they're planning to retire at the end of September. And so, it was one of those where for each person, everybody had to look at those kinds of things on an individual basis. So we've seen a little bit of anxiousness, a little bit of anxiety perhaps, because particularly at the federal level, the challenge becomes if you are a federal employee and you choose not to pursue this opportunity, that's still not necessarily an assurance that your job is going to be guaranteed as you go forward. So, there's obviously a number of things that people have to give consideration to.
Yeah, kind of follow on that as well, and talking about the investment anxiety integrated throughout the whole country. Are you seeing any impact of the uncertainty that we have with the federal job market as being manifested to the market as a whole?
We really have not necessarily, not again on a local basis. Now, make no mistake, for me, again, you got to remember this is decades of experience talking here. I tend to oftentimes put everything into a category of, look, that volatility, that uncertainty, that up and down sort of rocking motion, and is continual anyway. Okay, and we always remind people that when you look at equities in particular, in a given year, there is always, on a year-to-year basis, an intra-year decline that we need to expect anyway. And this is really interesting. There's J.P. Morgan did a study back some time ago, actually just fairly recently, because the data was updated through the end of 2024, where they went back over the last 45 years. The average intra-year drop for the S&P 500 is actually 14%. On an annual basis, despite the fact that 75% of the time, out of that 45-year window of time, 34 out of the 45 years produced positive returns, for the S&P 500. So what's really fascinating about that is when you stop and you think about it, we always put that volatility, that uncertainty, that uneasiness that people are going to experience if it's being generated by financial markets, that's just kind of a byproduct of the kinds of things that people often have their money in anyway. But again, the one thing I believe, where we're very helpful with folks is trying to make sure that they have a lot of emotional competence with regard to how they make decisions going forward. Because, again, you have to be very careful about making emotionally driven financial decisions, because almost always it causes you to do the opposite of probably what you should have done in the first place.
Hey, John, this is John Gilstrap.
Yeah.
On calculating the required minimum distribution, what is it a percentage of the overall account, or is it consistent?
Yeah.
From year to year?
Excellent point. That is one of the things that one of the biggest mysteries a lot of people have. The way that required minimum distributions are calculated is you take so once you get to what is referred to as your required beginning date. Now, currently under current law, that is the age of 73. So it started out years ago at the age of 70 and 1/2. Then it moved to the age of 72. Now it's at 73. I am 63 years old myself right now. By the time I get there, my required beginning date won't be until the age of 75, okay? So once you hit that required beginning date, you take the December 31st account balance of the prior year, and you divide that by what is referred to as the recalculated life expectancy that you have for the age that you are, okay? Typically, that first life expectancy number that you're going to use is somewhere in the neighborhood of 27. Okay, so normally it's 27.4, and again, it's a function of where's your half birthday? Does it move down? And it gets a little silly sometimes. But, at that first distribution, you're basically taking whatever your account balance was, and you're dividing it by about 27. So we'll keep the math real easy. So if you had, say, for example, a $270,000 account balance divided by 27, your first required minimum distribution would be $10,000. Here's what's going to happen, though. Next year, theoretically, your account balance is going to grow a bit. That's kind of what we always hope would happen, number one. Number two, your recalculated life expectancy is now a smaller number. So on a year-by-year basis, we're always dividing by a shrinking divisor, and that always forces out larger sums of money. So when people start looking at a required minimum distribution illustration, what they pretty quickly come to the realization of is by the time they've gone 10 to 12 years into the distributions, the amount of distribution that is being required is starting to rise pretty dramatically. And that's where that's where we challenge people to give thought to, are you aware of that? What's your plan? How do you plan to deal with that from a tax point of view?
So I'm 67 years old right now. So if I get hit by a truck, what happens? When does the required minimum distribution? Obviously, that could be my concern. It's either going to be my wife's concern or children's concern.
Yeah.
When does that kick in?
Excellent. So here's what comes into play. So if you get hit, if you get hit by the truck, but you survive the event, okay? Again, under current law, at the age of 73, you're going to have to start complying with that distribution. If you perish as a result of the truck encounter, your wife, we would be able to roll those dollars into her IRA or into an inherited IRA. And again, there's a little bit of a discussion there about which makes more sense. But if it goes into her IRA, she would then do the requirement of distributions then based on her age and when those RMDs are going to start for her. Let's play this out. Let's say she only lives, just a short period of time and then passes away. Say she makes it to 75, 76, 77 years old and has passed. If you then have children, grandchildren, natural persons that these assets are now being left to, they now, under current law, and this changed a couple of years ago as a result of the Secure Act 1.0, when it became law in January of 2020. The way that now works is your heirs have a 10-year window of time to complete the entire distribution out of those tax-qualified accounts. So the analogy I like to use when I describe that is your kids have a funnel that is 10 years wide at the widest part of the mouth. And all of that money has to fit into that 10-year funnel. Now, if you have not started doing your required distribution, so let's say 67, you perish, and maybe you and your wife both stepped off at the curb at the same time, neither one of you saw that truck coming, okay? You both perish because you were not yet of your required beginning date. Your heirs could, I don't know that they would want to do this, but they could do nothing for years 1 through 9, okay, and then hold that distribution until the 10th year. Now, if it's a traditional account, that's all taxable income in that year. If that happened to have been a Roth account, that actually might make sense to do because now that 10th year distribution is going to be totally tax-free income. So let me go back then. If once for a person who passes after they've reached their required beginning date, their heirs have a required minimum distribution that must be taken in years 1 through 9, and then they have to take the balance out in the 10th year, okay? And the challenge with that becomes that oftentimes when you look at those assets cascading from one generation down to the next, usually that succeeding generation, the children, are typically in their highest wage earning years. And so now, what you have going on is assets being passed down onto their 1040 and being taxed on their tax return on assets that have started out as yours. But again, because these are IRD assets, income in respect of decedent, you hadn't squared up on the tax liability, therefore they have to. Does that make sense?
It does, and not to make this too personal here, but my father passed away in 2006, and we are still getting RMD funds from.
Yes, you will. That's okay. So this is really good. I got to keep an eye on my time here. So because of the fact that he passed in advance of January 1st, 2020, okay, so Secure Act was not in place. So the old law, so deaths that occurred before December 31st of 2019, those individuals actually have what is referred to as a non-recalculated life expectancy that they can do those distributions. So if you were, whatever, in your 40s or 50s when that happened, you actually now have probably a 25, maybe almost a 30-year window of time to fulfill and complete those distributions. And that's something we try to make sure people understand. We went from being able to distribute over decades to non-spousal beneficiaries to now those distributions have to be completed within a decade's window of time. And again, there are a lot of people that simply have not processed it through to that level where they've given consideration to what are the tax implications, when these assets pass from our generation down to our kids, because they no longer have the life expectancy of the children to do those distributions. It's a great point that you make.
Good stuff. New stuff that came out that we've not discussed before,
Yeah.
I don't think. Right? John, about a minute left, minute and a half. So in some circumstances, as we go back to your previous discussions regarding with the required minimum distributions, would it make sense to draw on your IRA or your 401k earlier if it's a taxable account?
Very, very good. Yeah, one of the things we often suggest, one of the things we always tell people is, and I'll be candid with you guys, we actually expect when someone comes in to talk to us initially, we want to see their tax return, and we actually ask that of our clients on an annual basis, because what we want to identify is how much headroom, if I could use that term, do you have in the bracket that you're in? Because what we see is a lot of people who are, because they're not doing their distributions, they're in fairly low tax brackets, and they think, well, I'm in great shape. Well, wait a minute. You're not, because what's coming down the road is you may wind up in a higher tax bracket, and or your kids may be. So that's something we actually take a look at, whether they take distributions or we start doing Roth conversions. There are a lot of discussion points that start to bubble to the surface, when we get into those types of discussions.
Great stuff,
Great
John.
point, though.
How do people get in touch with you today, sir?
Yeah, we are in the office today, despite the fact that it's a President's Day. We are here, 1270 Winchester Avenue, right here in Martinsburg. Our phone number is area code 304-263-4343.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Very good, gentlemen. Have a great day.
You too.